Okay, so let me get ready. So welcome to everybody. This week we're getting ready to get started in this week's parsha, which is Mishpatim, which begins in Exodus chapter 22, verse 21, and it goes through chapter 24, verse 18. And so as we get ready to get started, this parsha is called Mishpatim, which is often translated as ordinance or judgments. And when you start looking through these chapters, it's a list of rules. And our idea of rules and laws and judgments filter how we look at this portion, because we often get bored reading through, this portion or this passage, or we read it half-heartedly and throw it aside, because a lot of times we don't really see the relevance to it. I don't have an ox or a sheep. How is this going to apply to me? But this parsha is very relevant for today because many are throwing out the commands of Yah. And, Yah, when he gave his Torah, his word to his people, these commands, it was to teach them how to live a free life. He didn't give it to them when they were in slavery. He gave it to them when they were free. And if you think about, with freedom, we have to have a standard or a boundary for living. Because if you have freedom without standards or boundaries, basically we've got anarchy. And so, this is, Yah showing us this is how you are to live a righteous life for me. This parsha, before we get into it, is the 18th one of the year. This is the 18th portion of the year. And 18 is high or life. And so these rules are about our life. It's about living the law of Yah. Because if you think about this, and Eddie and I, sorry, my sinuses, Eddie and I were having a discussion about this earlier this week, is about when people die and things like that. That you can't, our Greek mindset is we're focused on life after we're dead. Oh, we want to make it to heaven or whatever. But in the Hebrew mindset, it's focused on the here and now, because you can't praise Yah. You can't live a life for Yah once you are dead. It's already done. So it's about living the life now. In Psalms 115, verse 17, it says, the dead can't praise Yah, not those who seek down in silence. So, a lot of people are concerned about just getting there, but you have to live your life now for Yah. So I want to stop before we get into it and think about laws for a minute. So think about a state, and I'm not going to mention any names, but think about a state with very liberal laws that go against Torah. Yeah, Eddie. Like abortion or LBGTQ, whatever. Okay. Wow. Now think about a state that has very conservative laws concerning abortion or LGBTQ. Okay. What do those laws tell us about each one of those states?
How they believe in a God.
Yeah, how they believe. It tells us about how they believe. It reflects their belief system. And so as we go through, this parsha, we're going to see these different rules or laws, and they're reflecting the lawgiver. Okay. Mm-hmm. So as we're going through these, they're telling us about the character of Yah, not our character, but about his character. And so when we study these commands, it's a study of Yah himself. And so when we think about, I know some churches and stuff will say, oh, well, we do away with the commands. Then basically we're doing away with Yah and his character. And we're basically saying that we have the ability to change his work.
We do away with commands and we do away with God.
Yeah, because if we're doing away with the commands, because it says he is the word. Yeah, he is the word. And then we also come to the question about this. Didn't Jesus or Yeshua do away with the law? Because, and Yeshua himself answered that question, or is it just for the Jews? So let's go first, before we even get into the parsha, let's go to Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5. And I'm going to go to verse 17. Okay. Don't think that I have come to abolish the Torah or the prophets. This is Yeshua saying this. I've not come to abolish, but to complete. Yes, indeed, I tell you that until heaven and earth pass away, not so much as a yod or a stroke or a tittle will pass from the Torah, not until everything that must happen has happened. So whoever disobeys the least of these mitzvot, or these commands, and teaches others to do so will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever obeys them and teaches will be great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you that unless your righteousness is far greater than that of the Torah teachers and the Parashim or the Pharisees, you will certainly not enter into the kingdom of heaven. So, these are, Yeshua's words here. He says, he didn't come to abolish them, the Torah or the prophets, but to complete it. And, that word complete in the Greek is the word pleruo, I guess is how you say it. I'm not Greek, so I don't really know the Greek. But pleruo means to not only, is translated as to complete or to fulfill. Okay. And that, and a lot of people say, oh, well, then that means, Jesus or Yeshua fulfilled it, that by fulfilling it, we no longer have to do it. Well, that's another word saying he's made it annulled or obsolete or done away with. And one example I like to use with this is, and I've used this before, is the Super Bowl. Okay. The Super Bowl is the fulfillment in football. So does that mean that after we have the Super Bowl, we never have football again? Because football would be complete. Right. Yeah, a lot of women might be saying, yeah, that's like, but I mean, and when we look at that, we know that doesn't mean that, but it is the fulfillment of football. Okay, so men would be brokenhearted. But pleruo is better defined as to make full or to show the expression of. So when we look at, this where, Yeshua says, I didn't come to abolish the Torah and the prophets, but I came you to show the full expression of how it is to be done. Okay. And not only that, but if we also look at what Yeshua says after that, he says, I tell you that until heaven and earth pass away. Well, wait a minute. Do we still have heaven and earth? Yes. So, he's like, okay, and until heaven and earth pass away, it's still going to be in effect, that not one jot, one yoke, one tittle is going to pass away from it. And so, and not only that, but if we go on down, he tells us that we as believers, our righteousness should be that greater than of the Pharisees. And so we as believers should be doing the law, the Torah, more than even the Pharisees did. But, today, we see many in our world that are turning from, the law of Yah. Let's go over, since we're here, let's go over to chapter 7 in Matthew.
You were talking about that, and it goes along with scripture about God's going to turn them over to the own reprobate.
Yeah.
Because they're doing what's right in their own eyes.
Yeah, she was just saying that, this goes right along with, the verse that talks about that God will turn them over to a reprobate mind because they're doing what's right in their own eyes. Okay, Matthew 7, and I want to go down to verse 22. Matthew 7:22. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name? Didn't we expel demons in your name? Didn't we perform many miracles in your name? Then I will tell them to their faces, I never knew you. Get away from me, you workers of lawlessness. Okay. And I know some say workers of iniquity there, depending on your translation. But he's telling the people that were prophesying his name, they were expelling demons in his name, they were doing miracles in his name. But he says, I never knew you because you are workers of lawlessness. And if you, what is lawlessness? You know, in the Greek, that word's anomia, which means without the law of Moses, which is the Torah. But if we also go to, you know, what does it mean to be lawless?
Well, most of the time, churches now do not even go to the Torah portion. I mean, the first 5 books of the, you know.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, and she was just saying that, you know, a lot of times many don't even go to the front of the book at all. They, you know, it's only starting, you know, middle of the book and the end. Yeah, they only go to the Gospels and forward. So, but, you know, and if we go to 1 John 3 and 4, it says, everyone who keeps sinning is violating the Torah, because indeed sin is a violation of the Torah. Okay. In the King James, it words that whoever commits sin transgress the law, for sin is the transgression of the law. So what is lawlessness then? It's breaking Yah's law, Yah's Torah, okay, which is sin. Okay. And if we, you know, look at that, you know, the parallel passage for Matthew 7, if we go over to Luke, because this one gives you a little bit more. In Luke chapter 13,
Matthew 7.
no, I'm going to Luke chapter 13 now. That's the parallel passage to Matthew 7 that we were just in. If you go down to verse 23, 13, 23, it says, someone asked him, are only a few people being saved? And he answered, struggle to get in through the narrow door, because I'm telling you, many will be demanding to get in and won't be able to. Once the owner of the house has gotten up and shut the door, you will stand outside knocking at the door and saying, Lord, open up for us. But he will answer, I don't know you or where you come from. And then you will say, we ate and drank with you. You taught in our streets. And he will tell you, I don't know where you're from. Get away from me, all of you workers of wickedness. You will cry and grind your teeth and when you see Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov and all of the prophets inside of the kingdom of God, but you yourself are thrown outside. Moreover, the people will come from the east, the west, the north, and the south to sit at the table of the kingdom of God. So look at what he's saying here. You know, this is going along again with him saying, I never knew you. Well, he says, you know, and, you know, they're asking him the question, well, only a few being saved. And he says, you got to struggle to get in that narrow door. Well, we know in John 10 and 7, Yeshua says that he is the door. But notice in this parable, he's telling him, he says, you know, the owner is going to shut the door. God's going to shut the door. And people are going to be knocking at it and they say, oh, we know you. You know, didn't we, you know, teach in your, you know, you were here teaching, we ate and drank with you. We did these things with you. And he says, I didn't know you. Get away from me, you workers of wickedness. And again, the phrase here in the Greek for workers of wickedness is ergates adikia, which when you look at what that means, it means those who are breaking the law. Okay. And it says they're going to be thrown outside. They're going to be thrown outside of the kingdom here. And, you know, do we want to be, you know, why are they being thrown outside of the kingdom? Because they were breaking the law. They were thrown out, you know, and I don't want to be amongst those that are lawless and thrown out here. I want to follow his commands. Now, that doesn't mean that, you know, that following his commands made me saved. Okay. I'm saved because I believe, but once you believe, it says, how do you know that he asked Peter, how do you know I love you? Because you follow his commands. Do you love me? He's asking him over again. Do you love me? Do you love me? Yes. Then what do? You follow my commands. You feed my sheep. And so, but because I am saved, I want to show him that I love him. And by walking his commands, it's basically proving that I am saved. And so that's, to even get to the point where we're going into the parsha, because we got to understand that what these laws and rules are about, and that they still do apply to our lives. So,
and like you taught on several weeks ago about not that there's the 613, not all of those are for everything we have to do,
right?
Because, and people say, well, it's too hard for us. Even in scripture, they say, this is too hard for us.
Yeah, she was just saying about this. Yeah. About the 613, a lot of people say, well, are you going to follow all 613? Well, not all 613 apply. Some are only applying to women. Some are applying to farmers. Some are applying to when you're in the land. Some are applying only to priests. And that, yes, yeah.
But
that doesn't mean they don't apply. It just means it's not applying to you. That's not a command for you. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and she was talking about how it's, people say, well, it's too hard for you, but then even Deuteronomy says it's not too hard for you to do. And that what makes it hard is by people adding to it other commands that aren't there, or what it doesn't say. So the rabbi's commentaries, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they're listening to other things instead of what the word says. Yeah. Okay, so going to the parsha, Exodus 21, and I'm going to look at verse 1 first, because this is where we get the title from. And it says, now these are the Mishpatim, which thou shalt set before them. Okay, so this word Mishpatim, the root of that is, Mishpatim is plural, Mishpat is singular. So Mishpat has at its root Shaphat, which means judge, and it's referring to judging sin. Okay, and this is how we're to be righteous judges, is by presenting the word. What does the word say about things? Okay, we're not to judge by what we think, but what does the word say? And so this is how we're to judge. And I'm just going to, mention this verse too, is Romans 3 and verse 20. It says, for in his sight, no one alive will be considered righteous on the ground of legalistic observance of the Torah commands, but because what the Torah really does is show people how sinful they are. And this is where, I read the verse earlier in 1 John 3 and 4. How do we even know what sin is because the Torah tells us what it is. It's even 1 John, he says the sin is a violation of the Torah. Now, that word Mishpatim in Hebrew is spelled Mem, Shin, Pei, Tet, Yud, Mem. Okay. Mem, Shin, Pei, Tet, Yud, Mem. And if we look at the meanings of each letter, we get a little bit more information. So the Mem is chaos or water. Okay. Shin is always El Shaddai. Pei is the mouth, what you're speaking. Okay. The tet is a basket, but it also, because a basket is holding something, it's to surround something. And then we have the yod. The yod is the hand. Okay. And then we've got another mem at the end. Okay. So when we look at that word Mishpatim, we've got mem at both ends. We've got chaos at both ends. But in the middle of the chaos, we have El Shaddai's spoken words are surrounding us. So if you think about what his Mishpatim is, he's basically saying, there's chaos in this world. You've got chaos in the world, but if you're following my commands, that it is basically El Shaddai's words are surrounding you like in the palm of his hands. He's keeping us. If we keep his Torah and his right rulings toward each other, then we're basically being safely surrounded by his words in his hands. So, which I, thought that's just, even the picture within the word itself, not even looking at what the commands are. It's, exhorting us to obey his commands. And when this section, we see there are actually 53 out of the 613 commands. That's a lot of commands just in these few chapters. Mm-hmm. And, there is a link with 53 because, when you look at 53 and there, we've got a link with the word Yeshua and Torah, because when you find the gematria or the numerical value of a word, there are two different ways you can calculate it. One is by the value of the letter itself, and another is by the ordinal number, how it falls in line of the alphabet. And by looking at each of the letters in the ordinal position here, when we look at Yeshua is spelled Yod, Shin, Vav, Ayin, and it is, Yod is the 10th letter, Shin is the 21st letter, the Vav is the 6th letter, and the Ayin is the 16th letter, so that's 53. But we also look at the word Torah, and Torah that is written Tav, Vav, Resh, He. Tav is the 22nd letter, Vav is the 6th letter, Resh is the 20th letter, and then the He is the 5th letter. So Yeshua and Torah, both by spelling them out in the position of the letters, they're both 53, which is the exact number of commands that are in this parashah. So, it's a picture of Yeshua is the Torah. He is the living word, which is what the New Testament confirms, that he is the word. John 1:1, he was the word. Okay, so in Exodus 21:1, it says, these are the Mishpatim, or the ordinances, rules, rulings, however you want to interpret that you are to present to them. Now, it starts that way in English, these are, but when it really starts in Hebrew with the word vav, which is and. So it's connecting it back to what did we read right before this, is the giving of the 10 commandments. So these aren't just separate rules than what we read in the 10 commandments. These are actually linked back to the 10 commandments, because the 10 commandments are actually overarching principles, and these rules are how you do those 10 commands. Okay. And one thing I was listening to Rami Smith, and she pointed out that there was, an interesting link between, these that, and there was one that I, because when you start looking at some of them, you can see very easily, and some of them you can't. But if we think about a rule or a law, it's not just about the action itself. For example, and I know I'm doing a lot of prefacing before we get into these, but if we think about, this is tax season, we have to pay our taxes. By paying our taxes, that's a rule. You got to pay your taxes. You're making money, you got to pay your taxes. Okay. And then we think about, okay, we also have another rule. I leave here and go out in the neighborhood. There's a stop sign out there. There's a rule. I got to stop at that stop sign. So those two don't seem to be connected, but there really are. They're both expressions of a higher principle, because they're both expressions of the larger community that we live in. Because if I run that stop sign, I'm bound to hurt somebody that's in my community. Okay. That's going to affect the people that are around me. By paying my taxes, it's also helping those in my community. It's supposedly supposed to help pay for the roads and the schools and stuff like that. Okay. So those two laws have different actions, stopping at a stop sign, paying your taxes, but they are related to that same principle of helping your community. Okay. Huh? Yeah. No. And he's like, yeah, we ought to have that optional paying the taxes. Well, but okay. Well, no. Okay.
I didn't hear that comment.
And he said, yeah, you should be optional, like turning, right on red. It should be optional that you turn left on red too. So it doesn't matter. It is to him. He doesn't like that. So, especially if nothing's coming, he said. Okay. So
I have no problem with stopping at stop signs.
Mhm.
I do have kind of issues paying taxes and the way they spend the money.
Yes. And the fact that, taxes were instituted during wartime, it's supposed to only be for that. But I wanted to look. Yeah. I want to look at a couple of these different laws and see how they're connected back. Because remember, like I said, these 10 commandments are the overarching principles, and each of these laws are going to connect back to them. So what does this remind you of? Okay. Let's go down to Exodus 21, verse 12. And I'm going to skip around a little bit. Okay. Exodus 21, verse 12. Whoever attacks a person and causes his death must be put to death.
That's what I just said.
Okay. Okay. So what is it? So a person attacks someone and he ends up killing them. Okay. Go down to verse 21:16. Whoever kidnaps someone must be put to death, regardless of whether he has already sold him or the person is found still in his possession. So we've got basically a person is stolen or is kidnapped. Okay. Look at verse 17. Whoever curses his father or mother must be put to death. Mm-hmm. So we've got a person that's cursing his parents. So think about those three. One of them's about killing, one of them's about stealing, and one of them's about cursing your parents. What does that sound like?
What's that?
Well, no, not talking about that. I'm just talking about what in the word does this sound like? Killing, stealing, cursing your parents. What did we read last week? The 10 commandments, the 6th command. Okay. Don't kill, don't murder. Okay. There's a difference between killing and murder. Don't murder. Okay. The 8th commandment, don't steal. And the 5th commandment, to honor your father and your mother. So when we look at these commands, the ones I just read in verse 12, that one actually is going back to the 6th commandment and showing us, how do you not murder? Well, you don't attack a person and cause their death. This is one application of that. Okay. When it talks about not to steal, well, it's not just about stealing things, but it's also about a person being stolen here. This is, how you apply that. When you think about that 5th command about honoring your father and your mother, how do you do that? By not cursing your father and mother here. Okay. So these 10 commandments or 10 words, like I said, are these principles. When we get to this chapter, this is actually how we implement those. He's showing us, okay, these are the overarching principles. Now, how do you do that? This is how you do these.
That word curse,
Mm-hmm.
it has a different meaning. It's got out because, if you dishonor your father and not take care of them or don't feed them when they're hungry or look after them when they get old. It don't mean just me blah, blah, blah.
Well, this one, yeah, this one is to actually belittle them or make light of them. That's the word kalal here. Well, if you're, Well, this one, the word that is used in this specific verse here for cursing them is kalal, which is to make little of them. So when you are, not necessarily but when you're belittling them, when you are causing them to be of little account, that is what it's saying in this verse. That's a different word. That's the overarching principle. But then but then when you start going into this verse, So he's showing you how to apply that verse. Okay. So it's not just, oh, I'm not going to do this. I mean, there's other verses that talk about the father and mother, but this is just one that I'm just showing you here that is just, that links back. And then there's a whole midrash on whether or not, because honoring also does that mean that if your parents are not believers that you have to do everything they say? No, it does. When they're looking at that they're saying, well, when you talk about father and mother, you're also talking about who is spiritually to a father and mother to you too. So it's,
Yeah.
Okay. So when we look at these 10 commandments, their principles, these mishpatim are actually applications of that. And like I said, some of them easily link together, but some don't. Okay. And some of them we have to really look at the Hebrew to see the connection. So let's go to Exodus 21, verse 2. If you purchase a Hebrew slave, he is to work 6 years, but in the seventh, he is to be given his freedom without having to pay anything. If he came single, he is to leave single. If he is married when he came, his wife is to go with him when he leaves. But if his master gave him a wife and she bore him sons or daughters, then the wife and her children will belong to the master and he will leave by himself. Nevertheless, if the slave declares, I love my master, my wife, and my children, so I don't want to go free, then the master is to bring him before God, and there at the door or doorpost, his master is to pierce his ear with an awl, and the man is to be his slave for life. And if a man sells his daughter as a slave, she is not to go free like the men slaves. If her master married her, but decides she no longer pleases him, then he is to allow her to be redeemed. He is not allowed to sell her to foreign people because he has treated her unfairly. If he has her marry a son, then he is to treat her like a daughter. If he marries another wife, he is not to reduce her food, clothing, or marital rights. If he fails to provide her with these three things, she is to be given her freedom without having to pay anything. Now, think about this. What does this have to do with the 10 Commandments? What connection is it? Because we don't really see anything in the 10 Commandments that talk about having slaves. But it's got to connect back to one of those 10 Commandments.
There's got to be something there that you cannot make someone your slave.
It doesn't say that. You go back to the 10 Commandments. Yep. Yep. So this is going to link with it, one of the 10 Commandments. And what's interesting is when you start looking at these, especially this passage, because it's talking about slaves, and we don't really have slaves today. And this is, the 10 Commandments don't seem to be talking about slaves. But if you look at the language of the Hebrew, there is a connection. Because if you go to how this passage starts with this talking about the slaves, it says, if you purchase a Hebrew slave, he is to work 6 years, but in the seventh, he is to be given his freedom without having to pay anything. Now, notice the language. He is to work 6, but he's free or stopping his work in the seventh. Mm-hmm. Is there a commandment?
Shabbat.
Even Shabbat. This, talking about the Hebrew slave, is actually linking back to the 4th commandment of keeping the Shabbat. Yeah. How do you keep the Shabbat? It wasn't just, if we go back to, Exodus 20 and verse 8, it says, remember the day Shabbat to set it apart for God. You're to have 6 days to labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Shabbat for Yah. your Elohim, and on it you're not to do any kind of work, not you, not your son or your daughter or your male or female slave, not your livestock or your foreigner staying with you inside the gates of your property. So the link here with the slave or the servant and Shabbat, what, there is a, what is he saying? There's a time limit for keeping a servant, just as there was a time limit for working. Because when we are keeping Shabbat, what are we doing? We're basically recognizing you're not in control. We're recognizing who the master is, that he's the one in control. When we keep the Shabbat, we're basically testifying that, what happened, that there were 6 days of creation and that, he rested on the seventh. We're basically, by keeping Shabbat, are testifying of him and his creation. It's a Shabbat is a reminder for us that we're not the creator. We don't control things. During the week, we might work and we might create things and, do things, and we feel like we're in control of stuff. But there's one day during that week that we're to stop and remember who is truly in control, and it's not us. And the world doesn't work according to those rules. The world, works according to their own rules, And, this is, why, part of the reason why Shabbat is so important is, you're testifying of Yah. It's a reminder. It's a wedding band. It is, your sign that you are his. Now, another thing there is, like when we look at this, talking about the slave or servant here, and there's a difference because, the way Hebrew slaves or servants were treated is completely different than our idea of slavery now and stuff. But, when you look at what was happening here, like I said, just prior to this, the children of Israel had just left Egypt. What were they in Egypt? Slaves. Okay. And so the very first command that we see when he starts breaking it down is involving slaves. They know what it was like to be a slave in the world. Remember how they were treated in Egypt. And Yah's telling them, if you're going to have slaves, you're not going to treat them in the same way that the world treats them. And, even when it talks about the slave here, it's actually said a Hebrew slave. It's actually called an Eved Ivri. An Eved is more of a servant than it is a slave. Okay. Now, that passage that I read, verses 21, verse 1, all the way down through 6, and when you look at that passage in the Hebrew, there are exactly 76 words in Hebrew. And if you count the letters, there are 282 letters, which is interesting because when you say Eved Ivri, Eved numerically is 76, and Ivri numerically is 282. So when you look at that, that's the exact number of words and letters that are in that passage. And when you add them together, when you take that Eved 76 and Ivri 282 and you add it together, you get 358, which is the number of the word Mashiach. Mem, which is 40, Shin, which is 300, Yud, which is 10, and then the Het, which is 8. So 358 is the word Mashiach. So this Eved Ivri is also a picture of Yeshua. Because what did Yeshua come to do? He came in this world as a servant. Not only a servant, but he was a Hebrew servant. Okay, and look at what this portion is saying. If he takes a bride, did he take a bride? Yeah. And it says, well, okay, he has a choice to make. If he takes a bride, he can choose to do what? It says, If he came in single, he's to leave single. If he came in married, his wife is to go with him when he leaves. But if the master gave him a wife and she bore him sons and daughters, then the wife and her children belong to the master and he will leave by himself. Nevertheless, if the slave declares, I love my master, my wife, and my children, and I don't want to go free, then the master is to bring him before God. And there at the door or the doorpost, his master is to pierce his ear with an awl, and the man will be a slave for life. So think about this picture. Here we've got Yeshua, who came as a Hebrew servant. He took a bride, and he loved his bride so much that he wanted to be with her or remain with her forever in the service of the Father. So, and instead of having his ear pierced, because he already heard the word, he is the word, his body was pierced as a sign that he was committed to the Father and his bride.
All the way through slavery, black slavery, they were not paid a salary to buy themselves back away from the slave.
Yeah, you're not paid a salary as a slave.
They were just,
right. And when you think about why the wife wasn't to go with him, because he didn't have any money. How's he going to provide for her? This is the master gave him the wife. The master is going to take care of him. And so when you look at, what is here, it's, Yeshua is basically saying, okay, I have this bride. I love her so much. I'm willing to do the Father's will, which, what does he say in the garden the night before he does? May not my will, but your will be done. And, like I said, that word eved is in Hebrew is servant. And when you look at the pictograph meanings of that, eved is written ayin, which is the eye to see, the bait, which is the house or the tent, okay, and dalet, which is the door. So when you look at that word servant and you look at the meanings of each one of the letters, you've got what's happening here. This eved, the servant, is to see and experience or behold the door, the house of door. So who is the door? He's basically saying, I'm beholding Yeshua, John 10:9, where Yeshua says, I'm the gate, I'm the door. And if someone enters through me, he will be safe and will go in and out and find pasture. And we got to think that not only does this apply to Yeshua, because we know that there's multiple applications of scriptures, but we too, Romans 6:22 says that we were enslaved to sin. And so if we think about, well, we were slaves, how does this apply to us? Do we love our master enough and choose to be with him? And if you do, what does it say you have to do? It says that the master is in verse 6. Then his master is to bring him before God there at the door, the doorpost, and pierce his ear with an awl. And then the man will be a slave for life. Well, why his ear? Because what do we do with our ear? We hear. We shema. Because we are to hear and obey his word. And if you think about, well, he's piercing his ear there at the doorpost. When you think about he's doing it at the doorpost, this is reflecting back to when did they see the blood on the doorpost? At Passover, right? When they came, think about before they came out of Egypt, and what was that showing? That was, reflecting back to Yah saving them if they heard and obey his word. Here Yah said, I'm going to save you. And they had to show that obedience. And that's what they were doing. But this is also a foreshadowing of what Yeshua was going to do. Remember, John declares Yeshua being the Pesach lamb.
Mm-hmm.
Huh? The servant? Yeah, the servant would have done it. Yeah, he would have. He would actually put it like an earring in his ear. to show that he was a slave for life. Yeah, I don't know how big that earring was. So,
You sure was our match, he followed us.
yeah.
You got two packs over the whole thing right there with the doorpost, the blood and everything. Yeshua is the door.
Yeah.
Yeshua shed his blood, you know, all of that.
Yeah, it's all picture linking back because they would have remembered the blood on the doorpost and reflecting back to what did we just happen? We just went through Passover. Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, you think about, you know,
That's all. But that would say, boy, you're gonna be loyal.
yeah, that you're Lord. And not only that, but in Psalms 40 and verse 7, it says, sacrifice and grain offerings you don't want. Burnt offerings and sin offerings you don't demand. Instead, you have given me open ears. So think about how it's linking, you know, it's about obedience to him. It's not necessarily about the sacrifice. It's about obedience to him and us having the open ears to hear his word and obey and to do that.
Not just, he was sold into slavery.
Yeah.
But yet he still adhered to the one living God, no matter what. You know, he was obedient to Pharaoh, you know.
Yeah, she's just talking about how even Joseph, when he was sold into slavery, he was still obedient to, you know, God, even though he, you know, slavery. And even though, you know, he was exalted up to being, you know, one of the, yeah, God did work through him and exalted him. Yeah, he did get accused while he was there too. And what happens? A lot of times when you start doing these commands of Yah, what does happens? People start accusing you. You're being under the law. You're doing this, you know, for salvation. Yeah, yeah. And so, you know, and that's what happens. You start getting accused. Now, I want to skip down and look at another verse. And this is one that is often quoted. Go down to Exodus 21, verse 23. But if any harm follows, then you're to give life for life, an eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, and bruise for bruise. So now many people have taken this that, okay, you took my eye, I'm going to take your eye. You took my tooth, I'm going to take your tooth, because it's about revenge. But when you look at the context of this, it's about the person that is doing the action, not the one receiving the action. It's about holding the person accountable. And it's not about you going out and doing it. It's about the judge saying, okay, this was happened to you, so I'm going to exact an, you know, equitable punishment on this person for that. Yeah. And what this is not talking about, you know, you going out and exacting revenge. It's about compensating one for the injury that's done. So when we look at it, we want to say, oh, it's about us going out for revenge. And it's not. This is about Yah saying, I'm going to compensate you when something like this happens to you. Not that you're going to go out and do it. The judges are going to judge on it. But the, you know, the person shouldn't go out and take revenge on somebody else. But, you know, okay. But also, if we look at the context of this, go back to verse 22. Look at what it says. If people are fighting with each other and happen to hurt a pregnant woman so badly that her unborn child dies, even if no harm follows, he must be fined. He must pay an amount set by the woman's husband and confirmed by the judges. But if any harm follows, you are to give life for a life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, and bruise for bruise. So when we look at the context of this, it's about, you know, it had to do with an accidental death. Again, it's not about us getting revenge. Because, and there's a couple of verses here, if we think about just taking it from the Torah. Deuteronomy 32, verse 35 says, vengeance and payback are mine. We're not to be taking revenge. Vengeance and payback are mine. Even if we go to the New Testament, Romans 12 and verse 19 is actually, you know, quoting part of that, where it says, never seek revenge, my friends. Instead, leave that to God's anger. For in the Tanakh, it is written, Yah says, vengeance is my responsibility. I will repay. So we shouldn't be about revenge. We need to leave that vengeance to Yah. And, one other thing is, when you look at this, Yah is a God of love and life. So why is he saying, okay, well, a life for a life there. If you're killing the person, you're going to take that person, another person's life? And that's the way we've looked at it and read it. But according to the Torah, the death penalty for taking a life is only to be done if the killing was intentional. If we go back up to Exodus 21, verse 12, it says, whoever attacks a person and causes his death must be put to death. If it was not premeditated, but an act of God, then I will designate for you a place to which you can flee. But if someone willfully kills another after deliberate planning, you were to take him from my altar and put him to death. So in that way, if they actually planned it out and were committing murder, then yes, you were to take death penalty. But, if it was something accidental, it wasn't, to be done for death. And so how would it mean life for life? Well, you killed that baby and it was an accident. How do you do life for life? You basically become the one providing, just like that child would have done. So that child that is not going to grow up now helping their family farm or do whatever. You now are taking on that responsibility. Your life is to help that family too.
Verse 12.
Mm-hmm.
13. It says, however, if he did not lie in wait, but God delivered him into his hand, and then I will point you a place where you may flee.
Yeah, the Levitical cities. Yeah.
Okay, so during the wars of all the wars back then, God delivered a lot of the enemies into the hands of the people.
Yeah, there's a difference between war and, because he tells them to go to war at times, but there's a difference between killing, this is not war. This is because you're going to have people that are going to die during.
Okay.
Yeah, this is talking about in normal everyday life. You're not in war. Yeah.
It's not like whole army out there in God's.
Yeah. No, this is talking about like if you were out.
God delivered him made him.
Well, it wasn't, he's saying if it's an accident, then you have the right to be able to go to this Levitical city and people can't come and get revenge on you. You're not, they're, yes. Mm-hmm.
If somebody attacks you, you kill them, what's the consequence of them?
Well, there's not you don't have, because that's not, it's not premeditated murder. It's not capital offense there when you start looking at what the Torah says.
So when you're murder and killing somebody is two different things.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't look at it like that. But if you sit there during war or somebody,
he's just saying, there's a difference between murder and killing. Because when you look at that, in the Ten Commandments, it's telling you not to murder. But if you're defending yourself and you kill someone that is coming. Yeah. Well, if you even keep, okay. If you keep going. So let's look, like you were just asking this next part. Let's go to chapter 22, Exodus 22 and verse 1. This is an example of it. If a thief is caught in the act of breaking in and is beaten to death, okay, it is not murder. So if somebody's coming in your house to steal and you kill them, it's not murder. And look at the next verse though, unless it happens after sunrise, in which is the case, it's murder. That a thief must make restitution, so he has nothing. He himself is to be sold to make good the loss of his theft. If what he stole is found alive from his possession, he is to pay double, no matter whether it is an ox, a donkey, or a sheep. Now we think about, okay, well, back then they didn't have guns where, you can shoot from a distance. The thief is coming in probably they're going to come in with a knife or something like that. And you can see them and you can get away. But if it's in the daytime, but if you don't know when somebody's coming at night, you know, it's, yeah, it's not, yeah. But if you can see and get away and it's still daylight, then that is when it's saying that it could be murder. So the compensation, you know, if you look at what happens here, this thief is to make compensation. And the thief, look what it says. He, to make good the loss of the, if what he stole is found alive in his possession, he isn't just to pay that back. He's got to pay double. So Yah is actually saying, if you're going to be a thief, then you need to pay double what you took, because he's trying to deter us from this bad behavior.
And you know, when this was written for,
Mhm.
you know, because back then they didn't. Maybe
Yeah, you didn't have that much. Yeah. Yeah.
They didn't have much at all, and so I stole it, then that hampered their way of living, or
Yeah, they didn't have as much as that we have now, and you know, stuff like your closet full of clothes, and yeah. Yeah. Yeah, your cow's going to provide your milk. It's going to provide lots of things for you. So yeah. Now, if we go back, and I'm going to look, okay, let's go to chapter, since we're in chapter 22, let's skip down to verse 21. And connecting this back to the 10 Commandments. Okay, you're not to abuse any widow or an orphan. 22 verse 21. Which one of the 10 Commandments is this? We don't really see it. I mean, do y'all see a connection there? Which one with the 10 Commandments with this one? Not to abuse the widows or orphans. But when you look at the Hebrew, because in Hebrew where it says that you're not to abuse, okay? And it's actually the phrase lo ta'anu, okay? And if we look at the 10 Commandments, I'm going to go back to Exodus chapter 20. And depending on which version you're reading, I think it's verse 13. Okay. It says, do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not give false evidence against your neighbor. Okay. That same phrase, lo ta'anun, is used when it says don't give false evidence against your neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
So what does abusing a widow or an orphan have to do with giving false evidence? Because really, that phrase lo ta'anun means don't mistreat. Mm-hmm. So if we think about what it's saying here, giving false evidence is actually saying don't mistreat your friend by giving a false evidence. So when you're talking about don't mistreat your neighbor, don't mistreat your friend by giving false evidence. So if we think about, you know, that's also about, well, how is your, you know, your friend, your neighbor, the widows and orphans, don't mistreat them. So you can give a false evidence, you know, a false report that is mistreating them. You can mistreat them by how? Your, not only your words, but your actions can mistreat them.
Causing them more harm than what he said. By falsifying what you said, he's causing them more harm.
Yeah. Yeah, it's causing them harm. Yeah. It's basically you're not to mistreat your neighbor by treating them falsely. Well, how are you treating them falsely? But you can do by words, it can be by your actions. So in Exodus chapter 23, you're not to repeat false rumors. Do not join hands with the wicked by offering perjured testimony. Well, that one seems to fit with, don't give a false witness there. But it's also interesting that that one fits with giving a false witness. But when you look at the language of that one, it also fits with another one. Because I would, at first glance, I look at Exodus 23 and verse 1 and say, oh, okay, that's talking about the 9th command, which says don't give a false testimony, right? But when you look at the language there, in Exodus 23 and verse 1, in the Hebrew, it says, Lo Tisha Shema Shav. Okay. Now, I want to go back to Exodus chapter 20. Let's look at the 10 commands here. And I want you to go look at verse 7. And it says, you are not to use lightly the name of Yah your Elohim, because Yah will not leave unpunished someone who uses his name lightly or uses his name in vain, depending on what version you're reading. Okay. Now, what stuck out with me when I was reading that other verse is the word shav, because the word shav is the word in vain. Mm-hmm. So when you look at 23 and verse 1 in the Hebrew, it reads, Lo Tisha Shema Shav. When I read the 10 commands here, when I'm reading out of the 10 commandments where it says not to take the Lord's name in vain, this is what it reads in the Hebrew. It reads, Lo Tisha et Shem Yah Eloheha Lashav. It's using almost exactly the same words. The only thing it adds in there is Yah Eloheha. So the command here about giving a false testimony is also linked with taking Yah's name in vain. So when we think about, well, how is giving a false testimony linked with taking Yah's name in vain? Because when you're giving a false testimony, you're saying something negative, something false about someone's identity. You're abusing them.
People say, God,
yeah, but that, yeah. Yeah. But when you think about, not taking Yah's name in vain, it's more than just saying something that it's not, but it's also about devaluing or belittling Yah's character. And when you're giving a false, a perjuring statement, you're basically devaluing their character and abusing their character. So in essence, you're taking Yah's name in vain by saying something wrong about somebody else, lying about them. Which, we would normally not see that. But when you look at the Hebrew, it's the exact same words, except the only two added were Yah Eloheh's name in there. Okay. Since we're looking at names, I want to skip down chapter 23, verse 13. Pay attention to everything I've said to you. Don't invoke the names of other gods or not even let them be heard crossing your lips. So should we never say the names of other gods like Tammuz or Asherah or Moloch or Baal?
Oh, no.
I don't see why we should.
Okay.
But it's not so.
When you say Monday, Tuesday, Sunday, Wednesday, what are you saying? You're saying these pagan gods' names. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, when you even look at the Hebrew months, when you think about the Hebrew month, Tammuz is named after a pagan god. So, does that mean that we shouldn't say the days of the week because our days of the week, or, even the Hebrew name of the month?
We probably should. I mean, literally, we probably should say day 1, day 2, day 3.
That's what Yah calls it, and that's what they're called in Hebrew
That's what
too.
they did back then. We do it because
So we couldn't, that's gonna.
But even our month, yeah, most
it's
of our
what-
months are pagan
you
names.
know, it's what the months, the days.
Because
I mean,
January is named after
everything is-
Janus.
everything is ingrained, we're ingrained in all these traditions, all these words, all these things for
Yeah, he's just talking about how it's ingrained in our culture and that we don't even realize it. But when we look at this, here's something that I started looking at in Leviticus chapter 20. Let's go to Leviticus chapter 20 and verse 1. Look at what Yah tells Moshe. Yah says to Moshe in verse 1, say to the people of Israel. So he's telling Moshe, you got to speak and tell the children of Israel this.
Who said this?
Yah's telling Moshe. Okay.
Yeah, no.
If someone from the people of Israel or one of the foreigners living in Israel sacrifices one of his children to Moloch, well, he's telling Moshe to tell them and use this name Moloch. So Moshe's saying the name.
But that's for a cause and not to do it.
Okay,
really.
that's a cause not to do it. Okay, let's go to 1 Kings chapter 18.
And y'all said it.
And Yah said Yeah. 1 Kings 18 and verse 40. Remember Elijah and the prophets of Baal.
Yeah.
Elijah says to them, seize the prophets of Baal. So he's even talking to them and telling them, don't let one of them escape. He's using that name there. So Elijah is saying the name Baal. And when we look a little closer at, if we look a little closer of Exodus 23 and verse 13, where it says, pay attention to everything I've said to you. Don't invoke the names of other gods and don't let them be heard crossing your lips. When you look at that, where it's talking about invoke, it's actually the word tazikru, which is got zakar at the root. And this is in the hifal form conjugated, which means to cause to be remembered or done in remembrance of someone or in memorial. Like you're, yeah. And when you look at, when you look at that, where it's talking about tazikru in Isaiah 48 in verse 1, it says this, listen to this house of Jacob, called by the name Israel, who have come from the spring of Yehuda, who swear or tazikru by the name of Yah and invoke the name of Yah in Israel. It is not sincerely or justifiably. And so he's talking about them using Yah's name in prayer, invoking tazikru, his name in prayer. So when you look at, I'm looking at this and I'm going back and he's saying, not that you don't say their name, but it's about you don't call on them as in worship. That it's yeah, that you're
saying it.
yeah.
Why are you even saying the name for what? I mean, all of them were using it because they were doing it as saying, hey, that's pagan.
Yeah.
So you got to understand how, what context you use in the name.
But you're using it for prayer. You're not calling on, and that's where I think where it talks about, because some people have taken it to the extreme. Well, you don't even say that.
Yeah.
Well, then you can't say the days of the week.
Yeah.
Look, right now it's historical. What I'm gonna say is, God said, tear down all the high places, destroy every thing that
Yeah.
is not him. Goodness gracious, Paris, Rome, Italy, everywhere has those, everything pagan.
Yeah, and she was just talking about where, it talks about even tearing down the high places and stuff. And when you start looking at all of these pagan things that are up on these, not only, in Israel, but even around the world in these cities, you've got all these pagan statues that are exalted on high places. You look at Washington, D.C. Yeah. So, yeah. And yeah. Yeah. So, But this is where I said, it goes back to,
Mhm.
are we calling on it in prayer?
That
Are we
sounds good.
doing it in, it's not that we're doing it in
Whenever you
worship.
heat it up. Whenever you heat it up.
Okay, so let me look at this one right here. Exodus 24. I'm going to skip down to verse 7. Then he took the book of the covenant and he read it aloud so the people could hear, and they responded, "Everything that Yah has spoken, we will do and obey." And Moshe took the blood and he sprinkled it on the people and said, "This is the blood of the covenant which Yah has made for you in accordance with all of these words." And the children of Israel responded, so if you think about it, the children of Israel are responding, saying that we're going to obey this covenant. And so Moshe sprinkled the blood on the people. Okay. And we think about, well, why is he sprinkling blood on the people? And
That's a lot of people too.
yeah, and you think about, and if we go to Hebrews, and I want to go over to Hebrews chapter 9, sorry, Hebrews chapter 9. And I want to go down to verse 19. Okay, Hebrews 9, verse 19. And after Moshe had proclaimed every command of the Torah to all the people, he took the blood of the calves with some of the water and used scarlet wool and hyssop to sprinkle both the scroll itself and all of the people. And he said, "This is the blood of the covenant which Elohim has ordained for you." Likewise, he sprinkled the blood both the tent and all the things used in its ceremonies. And in fact, according to the Torah, almost everything is purified with blood. Indeed, without the shedding of blood, there is no remission. Remember, we've talked about this before. Of sins is not in the scripture. That was added. It's just there's no remission. Because that is actually not the word, it means release. Okay. And it says, now this is how the copies of the heavenly things had to be purified, but the heavenly things themselves require better sacrifices than these. So if we look at what's happening here, the blood was to inaugurate, I have to have a time for that word, the covenant, and it indicated that the people, basically had been set free from slavery. And that's exactly the same thing with Yeshua, that, not taking this the wrong way, but Yeshua didn't die to secure our salvation, because people could always be saved, okay, by their belief, if they truly repented. Yeshua's death was to inaugurate the renewed covenant of Yah and to cleanse the people, just like these articles of the tabernacle were purified by blood. So his blood was to cleanse the heavenly tabernacle. And so this blood that was released is basically enacting the covenant. And it's the same thing that we see in Exodus 24. When he is sprinkling the blood there, it's enacting the covenant on the people, saying, you just said we will do and we're going to obey. And he's sprinkling them, showing, yes, that you.
Basically, he had to do that because that was the first thing he did. And he went up and cleansed the people because of the sin of Lucifer.
Yes, because the heavenly temple, think about Lucifer and his temple. Yeah, he cleansed the temple. Yeah. And you think about the blood is sanctifying them, or basically setting them apart. So, and if you look,
that's what sanctification is.
That's what sanctification is setting you apart.
Of the heavenly temple, and it can cleanse your earthly temple.
Yeah, cleansing. He said, it's cleansing of the heavenly temple, but it's also cleansing of your earthly temple here. Exodus 29 in verse 21. We also see this here. It says, then take some of the blood that's on the altar and some of the anointing oil and sprinkle it on Aaron and on his clothing and on his sons and on the clothing of his sons with him, so that he and his clothing are sanctified, set apart, consecrated with him. So again, here it's the blood that is sanctifying or setting them apart. So, and think about Eddie, just mentioned this about us being the, heavenly tabernacle that, or not the earthly tabernacle, but, our bodies being like that, we've got the heavenly tabernacle. Right. But when we think about the word Mishpatim and going back to it, and you look at the numerical value of the word Mishpatim, the mem being 40, the shin 300, the pay is 80, the tet is 9, yod is 10, and then mem again is 40. When you add all that up, it's 479, which is interesting because if we go to 1 Kings chapter 6, so the word Mishpatim actually has a numerical value of 479. In 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 1, it says, it was in the 480th year after the people of Israel had left the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Shlomo's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is the 2nd month, that he began to build the house of Yah. Okay? So if we think about what this is saying here, it was the 480th year after leaving Egypt. But remember, Moshe gave them instructions in the 1st year about building the tabernacle. And it took them a year to complete it. So the tabernacle, the Mishkan, stood in the wilderness from the 2nd year after they left Egypt to Solomon building the temple, which is how many years? 479 years. So the tabernacle here, which is the design that Yah gave Moshe in the wilderness, which is what? Where his presence is going to dwell, is the same. It stayed, there 479 years until the temple was built by Solomon.
But wasn't yet that was the plans that David gave Solomon, was that to build the temple? Remember David?
David didn't give.
David's plan.
Yeah, but Solomon made it grand and all this stuff, but it's laid out. But yeah, when you think about it, well, God gave him the tent. Yeah, it was for it was made with skins and stuff. He actually made out like the structure. Yeah.
So
from the time of the Exodus until King Solomon.
So what did David and all them do before that?
They had the tent of the meeting. They had the Mishkan.
They had
because well, you remember it was 39 years in the wilderness, right. And then in Joshua 4, it says when they went into the land, it was actually at Gilgal, where they crossed over for 14 years there. Yeah, because wait a minute, it was in Gilgal for 14 years. And then remember, they took it to Shiloh, and it was actually in Shiloh for 369 years. The tabernacle.
That was in the wilderness.
Yeah. And then we see that in the 57 years, it was actually in Nob and Givon. So, 479 from when you look at Exodus, the 2nd year of the Exodus to King Solomon there.
So he started or finished?
It says it came to pass. It was the second, in the 2nd year that the Mishkan was erected. So, yeah, until it was finished. Yeah. So it was actually stood, the Mishkan stood for 470. So it actually stood 479 years. And so when you think about it, the Mishkan was the place, which is where these Mishpatim, which is what the numerical value of Mishpatim is going to be taught. And, so there's a correlation between these Mishpatim and how Yah dwells in us and the 479 years that the Mishkan stood. And,
back in Moses' time, when he first built it.
Mhm.
Was it still everything throughout all those years the same?
yeah, they set it up the
silver,
same. Yeah. Yeah. She was just asking, did the Mishkan? Yeah. They used the same skin. Yeah. Yes. And remember, each one of the Levitical, the Levites were, it stayed in Shiloh the longest, and that was 369 years that stayed in Shiloh. Yeah. 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 For 369 years. 69. Yeah. So, I mean, when you think about, that's a picture. And when I didn't go through all of the, no, Ben Givon. Yeah. So, and so when you look at, all of these rules in Exodus and these laws, you can go through and read all of them. And I didn't go through and read all of these. Like, if someone steals an ox or a sheep or slaughters it, and he's to pay 5 oxen, and so again, we read the one about the thief, about, how he was supposed to do if a person causes a field or vineyard to be grazed over or lets his animal loose to graze in someone else's field, he has to make restitution. Again, why? Because you're stealing. Your animal's over there eating somebody else's stuff. And so when you look at all of these, I didn't, like I said, if there's one of them y'all want to look at in particular, we can do that, but these were just some of the ones that I wanted to pull out and us to look at. But each one of them links back to a 10 commandment. And the problem is, some of them, like I said, is easy to figure out, but then some of them were like, well, how did, like we were looking at the one because it didn't have anything to do with slaves, but when you start really looking at the language of it in the Hebrew, you see, oh, it's talking about Shabbat. It's talking about working 6 and off the 7. Okay. So that's, basically, Mishpatim, like I said, this is a hard one because it is a lot of laws or rules to be read. But that's still
Institute in Jerusalem have the timeline of the Mishkan and show it. I went in it several times, but I've never really thought about asking them.
Yeah. Oh, they've got. She was just.
It shows like a 3D thing, from and goes.
They don't really. No. They've got. Yeah, they've got like. She was just asking like, does the Temple Institute have like a timeline of thing of the Mishkan? It has, they do have like a 3D puzzle piece that you can put together of the Mishkan, make it or build one, but it doesn't really, they don't have like something through time, but they've got books that talk about this is where the Mishkan was stationed. This is where it, was the history of it, or the history. Yeah. But that's just in scripture. You can go through scripture and see that. You can see where where it talks about, David took the Ark of the Covenant and he put it in this, this city. This is where it's sat for, all these years. It's just that we have to look at the time. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's what I'm saying. You've got to, when you start going through where, and it's not just the Ark of the Covenant, it's talking about the tabernacle itself. So where were they during that time? Like, during the time of the wilderness, every place they went, it was with them.
Right.
And then,
okay. I was going to ask you something about. I was doing research on Corey Ten Boom last night. Her story and Billy Graham had a movie made, but she was talking about the Holocaust or the Shoah. The Holocaust, how bad it was. and she said that when they took the women, they stripped them down naked and they had
Right.
to stand. She said sometime all day long,
Right.
every day it was that. And she said that you can tell them in just a minute, but she said she told the Lord, the first day, you know, when they did that, she said, I can't do this. I can't stand here naked before them. And said she heard him say, I was naked. I was naked before people. And you can do with this for my strength, you know.
Yeah.
And she said she said the Holocaust was bad, really, really bad. Said, people don't understand how bad it was.
Well,
But
yeah.
she said the Lord was speaking to her the whole time she was in, and he said about the generations. Do you think, and she said something about the last generation, is the last of them? Remember one of the men that died, they brought back, was a Holocaust survivor.
Well, okay,
And she was talking-
because this is a long.
and
Wait
he
a minute. Let me stop and hold on. Let me summarize what she was just talking about. Corey ten Boom and being in the Holocaust, and you know how bad things were, and that how you know how they had stripped them naked and they were standing there in front of the women. I mean, the women's were standing there for hours and hours at a time. And she was like, you know, I couldn't do that. I can't do that. And Yah spoke to her heart and said, I was naked before people too. You can do this. And so now, what were you saying?
She was saying that in scripture, it talks about the generations that would be at the end of the generation. That would be when he would come back, the generation then. And she said, you know, and I'm thinking, she was a Holocaust survivor.
Yeah.
And of course, she's dead now. But there's very few Holocausts. Do you think it's the generation of that Holocaust?
So she's just,
I don't.
She's just saying, she was asking, she said, well, you know, thinking about the generations, you know, the end times, you know, it got her to thinking about, is it the generation that of the Holocaust survivors going to be the last ones here? Because they're the last ones. Yeah, she was just saying that Corey ten Boom said that, you know, she was watching a documentary and that Corey ten Boom said that she believed that, you know, especially at the end, that generation would be the last one. Yeah, the ones see. So, I mean,
because of what they went through.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't
I
know.
think it's more of I think it's more of nobody knows, like we said, nobody's gonna know either way, you know, the time of the seasons. I kind of go along a little bit more, you know, somebody said it started 1948, some said it started 1968, when all of Israel came back. And then the time of, because it says it's gonna be like the time of Noah. Well, remember what happened in the time of Noah, you know, so which we see a lot of that now. So if it's, you know, they talk about if it's 67, if, you know, you go for 100 years, because that's how long it took Noah to build the ark, that would be in 2040 something. And if it was time, you know, to the 48, when they became a nation again, they said that's when it started. So you start 100 years from now. Nobody really knows. You know, you can look at it kind of any way you want. It just, we don't know. You know, God's got his own time. We just got to look at the seasons like the days of Noah. And that's the key, because that's what he said, you know.
And I think too, you know, I think the whole emphasis of this is we have that Greek mindset about, oh, I just want to make it to heaven. I want to make it to heaven. And it's not about getting some, how are you going to get there? You got to do it now. It is about how you live your life now, not how you going to live it then. Because the choice is already made by the time you get there. Yeah. So it's about, you know, and that's why, you know, I was listening to someone else and they were talking about how the difference between Hebrew mindset and, you know, Greek mindset is you don't have a lot of Jews that are talking about, well, what's going to happen in the world to come. That's not the focus. Their focus is on how you live now is going to get you to that point. I need to be worried about living my life right now and living it holy to him to even get to that point. Because, and that's the problem, is a lot of the churches are so concerned about, oh, I just want to get here. But if you're living like the devil every day, you ain't gonna have the time to make that choice. Maybe, you know, some people don't. Some people go very quickly.
Moses bringing them out of that last generation.
Yeah.
The generation had to die out.
Yeah, there was a generation that died out in the wilderness. Yeah.
Horrible thing. The Holocaust was basically the worst thing.
Yeah, I mean, well, you had lots of things that happened in between, you know, them coming out, and I mean, when you look at Masada and yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of horrible things that have happened, you know, throughout the years that, you know, that are, you know, just
It's a long time, and they still
Yeah.
survivors still
Yeah.
around.
Yep.
Not many. I mean, in the whole world.
Yep, that's true. There's still, yeah, she was just saying there are still some around. So, okay, we're gonna go ahead and say the blessing, and then we will stop.
Maybe think, you know,
Maybe you too.
Okay.
you stand in the door.
Well, like I said, the bottom line is we should try to every day live as holy a life as we can. And I think that's the bottom line, because Yah looks at, you know, our actions. Our actions dictate, you know, and shows whose we are every day. Amen. Amen. Yivarekaka Yahava Berishmei Reha Yair Yahava Penava Ileka Behuneka Yesayahava Vina Vileka Ba Yashim Leka Shalom. May Yahweh bless you and keep you. May Yahweh make his face to shine on you and show you his favor. May Yahweh lift up his face toward you and give you peace. B'Shem Yeshua HaMashiach, go in peace. Amen. 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 Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shalom. Shabbat, Shalom. Shabbat, Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shalom.